We're about to start turn 1 in a gate of hell, but let's finish setting the game up. In the prior video, I forgot to set up the Palmetto State and the Chicora, which are two Confederate ironclads that begin in the game. And if there is a rare random event that occurs in the game, the Confederates may also have the Charleston enter play, but that requires a 2 result with 2 d6s, so it's highly unlikely. And we place the two ironclads in S7, and the reason is that if the Union lands any units in L5, the ironclads can bombard the Union units in the area. Also, before we start play, we stated that area L17 is an objective or key area, and the reason is because there's also a fort there that I forgot to place, and that's Fort Johnson. And in the last video I stated that the Union has 9 ironclads, but I checked the errata and one has to be removed, and it's this one, the Mohawk. So the Union has 8 ironclads in the game. So we begin with the military support point determination and allocation phase, and by special rule in turn 1 we do not roll on this table, the MSP table. We roll on this table from turn 2 onwards. By special rule, the Union has 5 MSPs in this turn and the Confederates have 6. And the Union also has the advantage, and the advantage can be used for various purposes related to activating units for, let's say, strategic movement, regrouping, or even units that have activated before during the operations phase. So now we would normally go to the allocation part of this phase, where each side allocates MSPs in order to place formations in command, so during the next phase, the operations phase, these formations can move and fight and conduct various operations. But also by special rule, in the first turn, all units are in command except those that have a yellow -2 committed marker. The Confederates have 3 brigades in the Georgia and East Florida District Zone off-map box. These are the only Confederate units that cannot be activated in this turn. The Union has already 2 brigades on the map. They have Howell's Brigade in Folly Island, L2, and they have Vodge's Brigade in L3, and these units can conduct operations in the operations phase. And the Union also has 2 brigades in the islands off-map box. That's Strong's Brigade and also Chatfield's Brigade. Note that the other 2 have the yellow -2 marker. They cannot be activated. And finally, for the Union, all 8 ironclads in the Port Royal box can also be activated. So now we move on to the operations phase, and the Union always has the first impulse. And note that the game is played in impulses during this phase. The Union goes first, and after the impulse, starting in impulse 3 and onwards, there's a sunset die roll. We actually roll 2 d6s, and if the number that appears there is rolled or higher, then the turn ends. So we have guaranteed impulses 1 and 2. And we start with the Union impulse in this operations phase. The Union will not wait for the Confederates to build an entrenchment in Kauai Island in L1, so the Union will activate one of its 2 brigades that is available. Strong's Brigade is the strongest and most numerous brigade. The Union will activate Chatfield's Brigade for amphibious movement. Now, to represent that a formation or group of units is using amphibious movement, we will be placing the formation on this wooden disc. So Chatfield's brigade is moving through amphibious movement. We place it in S1, and from there it moves into R1, and there are no adjacent Confederate land units with an entrenchment marker in R1. So now Chatfield continues amphibious movement into R2. And R2 does contain adjacent units, Confederate units with entrenchments in L11 and L12. So now Chatfield has to disembark. And the Union units disembark in L24, and Chatfield is not obligated to, but declares an assault against the defending Confederates there. Why attack those Confederates? Because they're not entrenched and they're easier to defeat. And note that Chatfield could continue advancing on John's Island in the direction of Fort Pemberton. And that would place some pressure on the Confederates and would stretch their defenses. We will make the calculations for the battle in detail so that you can understand how this works, and for future battles we'll go a little faster. Now each side designates a lead unit, and the Union designates one of their units with a combat factor of 5, which is the number to the left. And the Confederates designate their cavalry regiment there with a combat factor of 3. Now, for the computation of the total combat strength of the attacker, you take the combat factor of the lead unit, 5, and you add 1 for each other unit participating in the attack. And the Union has 4 more units, so we're at 9. And you add +1 if all the units are from the same formation, and they are from Chatfield's brigade. So right now we're at +10, but we have to subtract 1 because the attackers attacked right after they conducted amphibious movement into the area. So the final attack modifier is a +9, and we will use this die there to indicate that. Now we calculate the defense factor modifiers, and we start with the lead unit that has a combat factor of 3. We add 1 because there's an additional Confederate unit defending for a combat modifier of 4, and no other modifiers apply for the defenders. Note that if the defenders would have been entrenched, then you add the number corresponding to the value of the entrenchment, either a 1 or a 2, or if there would have been a fort in the area, you add the value of the fort also, and that can be either a 3 or a 4. So now we have to roll 2 d6s, and we total the dice that each side rolls, and we add their respective modifiers, and the side that has the greater total wins. And both sides rolled a 7. The total Union attack strength is 16, and the Confederate attack strength is 11. So 16 for the Union beats the Confederate 11, and the difference is the amount of casualty points that the loser has to absorb. In this case, and the Confederates have to sustain or suffer 5 casualty points. And how is this done? Any full-strength unit that is flipped to its reduced side absorbs 3. The Confederates reduce their infantry unit, so we still have 2 casualty points to take care of. And anytime you reduce a unit or you eliminate a reduced unit, that takes care of 3. If you retreat a unit, that takes care of 1. So now both units could retreat, and that would take care of the 2 points. Or the Confederates have the option of either eliminating the infantry unit or reducing the cavalry unit, and that would take care of those remaining 2 casualty points. But in effect, the rebels would be suffering 3 casualty points. So this is a matter of deciding the rebels whether they want to give up the ground or not. And the rebels will decide to retreat, and that will be into area L25. And units that retreat that were not committed automatically receive a committed -1 marker. So that's an effect of retreating. And we place the marker on the retreated rebel units. And Chatfield has a -1 committed marker on Chatfield's units. And units that are committed, if they were placed in command during the MSP allocation phase, they can be activated again up to 2 times during the operations phase. Now, The disadvantage of these -1 markers is that they affect combat. So if the Confederates are attacked, that -1 will reduce their defense roll. But if the Union attacks with a -1, that -1 will also reduce the Union's attack roll. So that's the end of the first Union impulse, and because they activated Chatfield for amphibious movement, that consumes 1 MSP. And the Union has 4 left. So now the Confederates have seen that the Union has bypassed Hawgood's regiments here in Kiowa Island, and it would be nice for Hawgood if he can reunite all his forces in one area, and there is an operation for that. It's called the regroup operation, and it costs 1 MSP, and what that does is that it allows units from a formation to relocate to one area where there is already units of that formation. And the only caveat is that the area to which they relocate, at least one of the units or the units there do not move, and that's what they will do. The units that the Confederates have in Kiowa Island will relocate to Johns Island. And that completes the regroup action. And the relocated units also are marked with a -1 committed marker. And now the rebels have 5 MSPs left. And now we move on to the second impulse. The Union strategy is to stretch the Confederate defenses. The Confederates have committed a full brigade to Johns Island, and now the Union wants to place pressure on the other side of the map, especially around L4 and L5. There's a fort in L4 which stops all naval movement into S5. So the Union would like to conduct an amphibious assault in L4, of course supported by ironclads. The Union has 8 ironclads stationed in Port Royal, and now they will activate 5, which is the maximum amount of naval units that you can activate with 1 MSP. We place the naval units in S4, and now they move into S5, and from there they can bombard either the entrenched Confederates or the lighthouse fort. And we conduct bombardment with each unit, and other uncommitted units provide a +1 die roll modifier. And as we proceed with bombarding with each unit, there will be less uncommitted units. So let's take, for example, the first monitor that will bombard is the Patapsco. And the first thing we take into consideration is the naval unit's bombardment combat factor. The Patapsco has a 1, and for each friendly uncommitted naval unit in or adjacent to the target, we add another 1, and there are 4 other ironclads, so we're at +5. And we add +1 because the target is a fort, and it is adjacent to the bombarding units. So now we're at +6. And there's no other applicable modifiers. Now the fort, which is the lighthouse fort, has 2 numbers. The 2 is its combat factor, which we use in bombardments with the fort. The 4 is its defense strength. When bombarding a fort, we double the defense value of the fort, so it would have an 8. And we have to obtain a result, which is the die roll modifier plus 2d6, which is equal or greater than the defense value of the fort, which is 8, in order to flip the fort to its damage side. So we roll 2d6. The roll is a 6 modified to a 12, which is greater than 8, so the lighthouse fort is damaged. And we flip the fort to its backside, and a damaged fort cannot conduct bombardment, but still defends with 4, and for bombardment purposes, its defense value is 8. So now we go to the next ironclad, which is the Weehawken. We start again with 1 for the Weehawken plus 3 for the supporting uncommitted ironclad. So we're at 4 and +1 because the fort is adjacent. So that is a total of +5 as a die roll modifier. We roll 2d6. The roll is a 7 modified to a 12, which is greater than double the lighthouse's defense values. So now the fort is destroyed. Now it's the Montauk's turn. We start with 1 for the Montauk, plus 2 uncommitted ironclads. We're at plus 3. There's not a plus 1 because there's an adjacent fort. And we subtract minus 2 because that's the level of the entrenchments there. So the total Dyro modifier is only plus 1. So we roll 2d6. Roll is a 7 modified to an 8. So that flips the defenders to their reduced side. And now the Passaic fires, and it starts with a 1 plus 1 uncommitted ironclad. That's a plus 2, minus 2 for the entrenchments, 0. But note that the defense value of the defending unit is 4 now. So we roll 2d6, and the roll is a 10, which is greater than double the defense value. So the defenders are reduced, and they're already reduced, so they are eliminated. With the elimination of the defenders, we also remove the entrenchment marker. The remaining ironclad doesn't fire, and that's the end of the activation of these ironclads. We leave just one marker to denote that all ironclads have been activated. The Union has 3 MSPs left. Now we go to the second Confederate impulse. So the Confederates note that it's going to be pretty obvious what the Union will do in the next impulse, which is land Strong's brigade at L4. And that would place Strong's brigade adjacent to Fort Wagner for an attack probably during next turn. So the defenders have to do something to strengthen the defenses of Morris Island. Some thought was given to activate the Confederate ironclads to move them into S6, from which they can bombard S5 where the Union ironclads are. But the Union ironclads defend with a strength which is double their defense strength. The 5 there is not a movement factor but a defense value. So each ironclad defends against bombardments with double that, so it's 10. So it's very hard to get one of these Union ironclads even damaged. So the Confederates will not be sending their 2 ironclads out in the open sea like that. The Confederates have elements of Simonton's brigade at L8, which is the only rebel forces facing Howell and Voges's units there. Units can use strategic movement to move double their movement factor, but that is if they begin on the map, on any area on the map. And you see these Confederate forces, they begin in off-map zone boxes. Strategic movement is different when they're in an off-map zone box. They can move the extent of their movement allowance through other zone boxes and into areas. But it seems that the Confederates don't have much of a choice. They have to bring these units onto the map. So the Confederates will activate Walker's brigade, which is composed of 2 infantry and 4 cavalry units. So the infantry units can move 2 areas, and they will enter the map through L23 and will reach L22, expending their 2 movement factors. Now, the cavalry can move 3, and they will enter the map at L23, move through L22, and they will reach L19. And the Confederates have 4 MSPs left. Now we move on to the Union third impulse. Seems that the Confederates will not be able to strengthen L4 in any way or form, and before moving Strong's brigade through amphibious movement there, the Union wants to take care of Simonton's units in L8, and their only brigade that can reach that area is Voges in L3. So Voges is activated, and it will move into L7, and from there they will spend their second movement point to enter L8, and they announce an assault. Total modifiers for each side, +9 for the Union, +6 for the Confederates, and we roll the dice. Both sides roll 7s, so the Union has 16 and the Confederates have 13. 3 casualty points to be absorbed by the Confederates. So by retreating both units, they cannot satisfy the 3 casualty points, so they have to invert at least one of them. And they reduce one of their infantry units, and they don't have to retreat, and this is a space, an area that is engaged because it remains with units of both sides. Notice that the Confederates did not retreat, so their units do not obtain a committed marker. The Union has 2 MSPs left. The Confederates can still foresee the attack on L4, and there's no way they have any units that on one impulse will reach L5 or even L4. The best they can do is by activating Simonton's units in L8. They can cross a navigable river, which spends all their movement points, and they could reach L6. But that also entails spending 1 MSP just to move 2 units. Is that worth it? Another alternative is for Simonton to conduct a regroup action, in which case both of Simonton's units in L11 and the unit in L12 could be relocated to L8. So that's another option. However, the Confederates will activate Walker's units in L19. They have been committed, they have a -1 marker, but you can activate a unit that was previously committed for 1 more time during the turn. And they will conduct strategic movement, which will take them through L15 and into L16. And from there to L17, which is Fort Johnson's area. Now they cannot be activated again during this turn. And the Confederates have 3 MSPs left. And it's the end of the 3rd impulse. Now we conduct a sunset dice roll only on a 12. The operations phase may end. And notice that I say may end because if we roll a 12, the Union has an option of spending MSPs in order to extend the operations phase for 1 more impulse. So now we roll 2d6. The roll is an 8. So now we move on to the Union 4th impulse. The Union will take no more chances. It's time to conduct an amphibious assault near Fort Wagner. Now the Union activates Strong's Brigade. Strong's Brigade uses amphibious movement. It starts in S4 from there. It moves into S5. It could continue into S6, but it would have to make a landing in an adjacent land area, which could be L4 or L5. If landing at L5, the Confederate player has a free bombardment from the fort and the 2 ironclads that are located in S7. That, of course, could weaken Strong's Brigade for an attack on Fort Wagner. So Strong will disembark at L4, and that ends Strong's activation. The Union has 1 MSP left, but they also have the advantage mark. On to the Confederate 4th impulse, and it looks like the Union will activate Strong once again to attack L5, and the Confederates want to soften up Strong's Brigade to make things more difficult for the Yankees. Obviously, they cannot bring any ground units to Morris Island, and especially none to L5, and they cannot attack L4 where Strong's Brigade is, because the Confederates are too weak. But the Confederates have another option. They could activate the Palmetto State and the Chicora to move into S6, from which they could bombard Strong's Brigade. And that's what they will do. So the Palmetto State and the Chicora are activated. They move into S6. And notice that the boundaries for S6 are these lines here. This line here is a map fold, so just to let you know. Now, the Confederate ironclads can bombard any adjacent land area containing enemy units. And that is here, L4, and they can pick their targets. And the Palmetto State has a choice, and these Union units defend with double their combat factor. And they have 2 units there that defend with 4 because their combat factors are 2s. So the Palmetto State will fire at the independent New York regiment that has a defensive value for bombardment purposes of 4. The Palmetto State has a combat factor of 1 plus 1 for the uncommitted Chicora, and that's a plus 2. Now we roll 2d6. 3 plus 2, 5, which exceeds the defensive value of the target. So we flip the target to its reduced side, and it is a 1-step unit, so it is eliminated. And eliminating a unit takes away a +1 die roll modifier when the unit participates in an attack where it is not the lead unit. So that will have an effect on future attacks by Strong's Brigade. Now it's the Chicora's turn, and the modifier is only its combat factor. So it's a +1, and it will fire at the 7th Connecticut that has a total defense value of 4. So we roll 2d6. Roll is a 9 modified to a 10. So we flip also the target unit, and it is also a 1-stepper. So the target is eliminated, and that ends the activation of the Confederate ironclads. And the Confederates have 2 MSPs left. That's the end of the 4th impulse, and now we roll for possible sunset. The roll is a 5, so now we move on to impulse number 5. Suddenly things get complicated for the Union, because now an attack on L5 by Strong's Brigade is not a foregone conclusion. The rebel forces in L17 cannot reach Morris Island in this turn, but they can certainly do so in the next turn if they move to L6. And there is a rule that Confederate units in land areas adjacent to Charleston Harbor, like L17, they can move to another land area adjacent to Charleston Harbor, like L6, but it consumes all their movement points. So in the next turn, whenever Walker's brigade is activated, it still won't make it in one impulse to L5. So wanting to get more forces onto Morris Island, the Union will activate Vodge's brigade, currently in L8, and it will cross the river, this navigable river, into L6, and that consumes all their movement factors. And the Union will use their advantage marker to pay for that activation. Advantage can be used to activate a previously activated unit during the turn, and that was the second activation for Vodges. So now the marker passes to the Confederates, and we place a token on top of it to remind us that the Confederates cannot use it this turn. And that conserves the last MSP that the Union has. Now we go to the 5th Confederate impulse. And the Confederates will use the impulse to entrench, that is, to increase the entrenchment level of their units in L5. They have the requisite 5 combat factors, which is the minimum required to upgrade or construct entrenchments there. So now the entrenchment level is a 2. And the Confederates have 1 MSP left. Now to the sunset dice roll. On a 9 or more, the operations phase will end. And the roll is a 4. Now we move on to the 6th impulse. The Union has 1 MSP left. They could pass and save it for the next turn, or they could use it now. The Union could activate its ironclads in S5 to bombard the adjacent Confederate ironclads. But note that if they do so, they would not receive the +1 modifier when firing one Union ironclad for other uncommitted Union ironclads, because all are committed. The Union could use the remaining MSP to activate Howell's brigade so that it could either cross into L9 or move into L7, or even cross the navigable river into L10. The Union will activate the ironclads that they have left at Port Royal, which are 3 ironclads. We place them in S4. From there, they move into S5, and from there into S6, where they have to stop. Now they can bombard the Confederate ironclads, and note that these Union ironclads had not been activated, so the +1 die roll modifier for uncommitted ironclads will apply. And the new Ironsides fires on the Palmetto State, and it's 1 for its combat factor, +2 for 2 uncommitted Union ironclads. That's a +3, and the Palmetto defends with a bombardment defense of 8. The -1 for committed status is not taken into account. So we roll 2d6. The roll is a 4 modified to a 7, and the Palmetto State is unharmed. Now the Catskill fires, and it will fire also at the Palmetto State, but with a +2 die roll modifier. We roll 2d6. A 6 modified to an 8, and this time the Palmetto is hit, and it is reduced. And it is flipped to its backside, and now it's the Nantucket's turn to fire. Does it fire on the Palmetto to try to finish it off, or on the Chicora? Only a +1 die roll modifier applies now, so the Nantucket will try to finish off the Palmetto State. We roll 2d6, and 8 modified to a 9, so the Palmetto State is sunk. That's the end of the Union impulse. The Union has no more MSPs. The Confederate have 1 left. The Confederates cannot increase their entrenchment level in L5, nor move any units in L17. Simonton's brigade is in L8, but it also has other elements on the banks of the Stono River in L11 and L12. Confederates will use their last MSP to entrench Hoggard's forces in L25. With that entrenchment, Chatfield's advance in the direction of Fort Pemberton on Johns Island has been checked. That was the last MSP for the Confederates. That's the end of the operations phase. Now we go to the end phase. Now we remove all committed markers from all units on the map. Any Union naval unit in a sea area adjacent to an unreduced fort, like these 3 ironclads are, adjacent to Fort Wagner in the same sea area as an enemy naval unit, now have to return either to Cape Hatteras or Port Royal. So the ironclads return to Port Royal. And the Confederate player can relocate his ironclads, and the only one Confederates have is the Chicora. And it is relocated to S7. Now to the random events table. We roll 2d6, and the result, if any, will be applied next turn. The roll is an 11. Increased support from Washington. The Union rolls 1d6. On an even result, it will receive 2 additional MSPs the next turn. Otherwise, it's 1 additional MSP. So we roll 1d6. It's an even result, so the Union will receive 2 additional MSPs next turn. And as a reminder, I will place a Strength 2 marker to add 2 to whatever result the Union receives on the MSP table during the next turn. So that's the end of the first turn of the game. The second week of July 1863. Now we proceed to the third week, and the Union forces have been checked near the Stono River by Hagood's brigade, but the Confederates have scattered forces around James Island, and the Union is concentrating its forces on Morris Island for an assault on Fort Wagner. So stay tuned for the next episode of A Gate of Hell. This is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for watching.